I call David Shearer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The sad coincidence that unfortunately this bill is being introduced into the House on the same day as the Inspector General of the that looked into the activities of the SIS has seen that it's so woefully failed. And it does actually raise a point that I think is very important. We had the GCSB last year that was seen to have some very serious shortcomings. The SIS, again, we've seen today. And it does raise the issue which has been brought up before, which still has not yet properly, I don't believe, been addressed, and that neither of the problems that occurred in those two agencies were revealed by any internal oversight that was happening. The internal oversight completely and utterly failed. They were only brought about and only made public by scandals which occurred that were subsequently looked into and found that these agencies were really wanting in terms of the oversight that we have. And so we have a system in our intelligence agencies where the Prime Minister ultimately is in charge of both of those organs, the SIS and the GCSB. The Prime Minister also chairs the oversight, or supposedly the oversight committee of those two organisations, and has the casting vote. So what chance is there of internal oversight really functioning and working when you have such a system as that? And I think it's a major problem in our security apparatus. It's unique to New Zealand. It doesn't happen in any other country that I know of, certainly none of our Five Eyes, that low level of oversight occurs. Sir, this bill is one in which we have to get the balance right between protection and security of our citizens and at the same time the protection and the safeguard of privacy and the human rights of our citizens as well. We know that the world is changing, that the spread of the Islamic State, the IS, has occurred very rapidly. And there are threats to New Zealand perhaps that weren't around a few months ago. But we also have to recognise that this is a regional conflict which is being internationalised in part by ourselves, by the way that the international community is engaging with this regional conflict. And John Key said a couple of weeks ago that IS would rain carnage on the world. Look, make no mistake, this is a nasty, brutish organisation, but it's not about to bring terror and mayhem into our neighbourhoods tomorrow. It uses terror and atrocities as a weapon, but it uses it as a weapon to dominate and control parts of two countries. It has not been constituted in the same way, for example, as Al-Qaeda was. However, it is sophisticated, and increasingly it's reaching out to local people, including here in New Zealand, and asking them to take up arms and requesting those people to leave their own countries and travel over to Syria and Iraq and have them fight there on the ground for them. And it preys upon those people within New Zealand that perhaps have a grudge, that might be swayed by that propaganda, that might be on the extremes or the outliers of what is in New Zealand an extraordinarily peaceful and productive Muslim community in New Zealand. And the question still has to be asked and debated properly, I believe, is that the government's decision to send troops to Iraq, what impact that will have on the risk that we are facing here in New Zealand. So we have, as according to what we've been briefed by the security agencies, with some loopholes or some openings which have left us more vulnerable than what we might otherwise would give us confidence to believe that we are well covered for. And so for that reason, to look at those loopholes and to see what legislative changes are needed is the reason why Labor has said that we would support this legislation to select committee where we can actually hear that. But we have two concerns, and I certainly have two concerns, and the first one revolves around the issue of process. Sir, a short review took place directly after the election, followed by the drafting of legislation, the pushing through of this legislation before Christmas. That certainly was not the first time that these issues came up. Certainly the IS and some of the shortcomings that the SIS, our security agency, had were known well before the election, and that review could have taken place much, much earlier. I don't believe that the government has been particularly vigilant in terms of what it needed to do in order to get its house in order rather than rushing it through now. And rushing that through means that the select committee process that we are likely to have is going to be truncated. It's going to be much shortened, and the expert advice that we are going to get into here as part of that submission process are going to have much less time to consider the legislation. A third area which has been a casualty of rushing it is that we haven't engaged properly with the Muslim community. And Phil Goff and I had met with the senior members of the Muslim community last week and had a chat to them. I believe that they are allies in this process that could help us considerably getting this legislation and some of the things that we want to protect ourselves from through, but they have not been engaged, and therefore in many ways are seen to be the problem rather than what I believe they are, which is part of the solution. The sunset clause, as has been discussed just now, is there. It's 2018, it's 4 years out. Conceivably, in all probability, there'll be a different government in power at that stage. It's a very long way out. We would all hope that the review could be done sometime much sooner than that. So, sir, it's important to get the balance right with the protection that we want to seek at the same time as having those protections to our personal freedoms right. Australia, for example, is putting through legislation for exactly the same reason, but it has seen fit to be able to give its select committee, its Senate select committee, a much longer time in which to be able to consider the issues before it. There are some aspects of this bill that have been mentioned up to now that obviously are of concern that we would like to get much more expert advice on from people who appear in front of the Select Committee. The SIS, their expansion of their powers, particularly around video surveillance. In some ways this is bringing them up to where the police already are. So in some respects that possibly is less controversial, but again we would like to hear from the experts concerned around that. With the extension of withholding passports from 1 year to 3 years, again, I would like to see the evidence for why that is necessary, first of all, and secondly, to make sure that the checks and balances are in place, the review is there, the ability to appeal is there so that people aren't unnecessarily disadvantaged. And lastly, the point I want to mention, which is perhaps the most important, is the 48 hours where warrantless searches can take place, surveillance can take place without a warrant. I do believe that 48 hours in today's world is too long. We have telephones, emails, everything that would demand that is beyond what we need, and I do believe that we can look at that and certainly modify that considerably. And lastly, the cancellation of travel documents from people who are travelling who have been thought to have taken part in terrorist activities. So we need some way of getting those people back. We simply can't leave them stranded on the other side of the world without travel documents. That would not be responsible as a global citizen in New Zealand. So, sir, we need a good process. We need to address those fundamental issues carefully. We need to deliberate carefully. We need to hear from the experts. That requires time. It should not be hurried. And it needs time for public opinion and the public to be able to take a proper look at this as well. And I regret that that's probably not going to happen as we see it at the moment. Thank you very much, sir.
Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Simon Bridges.
Speaker, it's a real privilege really to